Well, today we're going to talk about taking a bold step. And our text comes from Matthew 14. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd after feeding them the 5,000. And he went up the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night, that would be about 3 a.m., Jesus came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, and he cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." This is the word of the Lord. Well, I was thinking about it, and I've been in some pretty serious storms throughout my life. I remember being a kid in Los Angeles, and we had the major earthquake, and wow, you see the walls of your house splitting, you hear that horrendous sound, the explosions that were going on. The city was devastated by the earthquake. Another time I was in Oklahoma, and all of a sudden they grabbed us and said, "We have to go down into the basement." And we went into the basement, and all of a sudden it sounded like a freight train was coming over us. It was a tornado. And when we came out, the other side of the street was gone. Of course, I've been in Florida now for a little while. We all have our hurricanes here, 145-mile-an-hour winds. I think the scariest storm that I ever experienced was in the Pacific. We had a 30-foot cabin cruiser. We were coming back from Catalina Island, and we were in the midst of a storm, and the boat would rise and then drop 12, 16 feet, and the crack, you just thought for sure that it had been broken in half, and all of a sudden we would be turned on our side, and it was just this most frightening experience. And I'm staring at my dad, who's got a hold of the wheel. There's no seatbelt, by the way, and he's doing his best to keep us alive. And here we have in Mark chapter 4, there's another storm that precedes the one I just read to you. Jesus is in the boat, and they're about to drown, and they say to him, "Don't you care that we're about to die?" And truly, isn't that the way storms happen? They come out of nowhere, unexpected. All of a sudden you have a bad health diagnosis, your finances are inadequate, your job crisis, you're fired, or worse, when your spouse says, "We're done." How do you get ready for these moments? You question God's love. This is what the disciples do. I said, "Don't you care?" And really what they're saying is, do you really love us? Because if you did, why aren't you making a difference in this storm that I'm in right now? I was reading about St. Teresa of Avila. She was in the 1800s, just this mystic, close relationship with God, and she was on her horse having her devotions, and the horse bucked and she fell into the mud. And she said, "Lord, why did you allow this?" And he said to her, "I treat all of my friends this way." And then she said, "Well, it's no wonder you have so few friends." But the question, why did you allow this? I don't want you to underestimate the power of this question. Steve Jobs, he rejected God because he couldn't accept a deity that would allow the kind of suffering that he saw in Africa. And for you and me, the storms of life, they can drive us to atheism, concluding that there cannot be a God with this kind of broken world around us. Or we can pause and notice the good in the world and the overwhelming evidence of Christianity, the billions of transformed lives. It's that place on how you handle the storms. And really, it gets personal. Let's go back to that question. Why did you allow this, God? It's a crucial moment to turn towards God or away from God. I mentioned last week that there's moments when people walk away from Him forever. Some bail out of the boat, walking away from Jesus to handle their trial on their own, blaming God for allowing it. Some bail the blessings out of their lives by walking away from God and not giving Him the chance to move in their situation. Some swim for another boat, not realizing that every boat in the world is in the stormy waters where sin's waves run free. And too many Christians, we live in a state of anxiety over what tomorrow will bring, and our fears swamp us so that we live in agitation rather than in confidence and trust, knowing that God's going to get us through it, whatever it might be. And really, friends, I want you to know that if you're in a storm right now, God allows these storms first to grow our relationship with Him. That's the primary thing that He cares about. More than healing your broken body or your situation, it's a heart-to-heart, soul-to-soul, spirit-to-spirit thing between you and God. And sometimes He'll put a storm in our path to correct us or to use us in another person's life. Okay? I think you and I should see our storms as spiritual opportunities to activate our faith. And really, the storms can forge our character. The best lumber for furniture is found in cold mountains where the weather is harsh and it toughens the wood. An easy life means that you never really have to depend on God. And so you never get to see His power, see His glory. Know what it means to have God step in and answer a desperate prayer. And it's kind of powerful. In the Mark storm, Jesus teaches them that when I'm with you, you're covered by God's care. I'm the master of life, of nature and human nature. I'm the master of death. Even the worst thing in this world is not the last thing. It's kind of interesting. At first, the disciples, they were afraid of the power of the storm. Then they're terrified of Jesus, who has this kind of power. Okay? But friends, I want you to know you don't have to be afraid of God. He knew you were going to be a sinner, and that's why He sent Jesus to the cross. He knows that you're going to struggle, and that's why He steps in and is patient and kind and full of grace, always trying to maneuver us to be under His covering and care in the safety of His love. And friends, I want to tell you, belonging to Jesus doesn't mean that storms will not attack, but it does mean Jesus will get you through every single one of them. And what's most powerful is in this Mark storm, the disciples realized Jesus is more than a moral teacher, more than a religious guru. Jesus is God, because no human entity could cause a storm to stop. Well, I think for you and me, we realize no philosophy, no system of behavior modification is able to handle the storms of this world, especially the storms that rage within each one of us. Okay, that's Jesus' specialty. When you leave Jesus at a spot where He gives good advice, you miss out on what He's able to accomplish in you and accomplish through you. One more time, Jesus can handle Mother Nature, and Jesus can handle human nature. That's why He came. Well, talking about the Mark chapter 4 storm, and if you've been a veteran in this thing called life, you know that when you get done with one storm, all that means is another one's coming. And we're in Matthew 14 now. Jesus has just fed the 5,000, and the crowd wants to make Him king. So Jesus says, okay, let me put the disciples in the boat so that they don't align themselves with the crowd's agenda rather than God's agenda. So he removes them from the situation. And I would imagine they were sad to leave his presence. The spiritual high of feeding the 5,000 would have been an amazing miracle. Okay? It reminds me of the Boy Scout that was late for his troop meeting. They said, why are you late? And why is your shirt all ripped up? He says, oh, I helped an old lady across the street. So, well, what happened? He said, well, she didn't want to cross the street. I don't think the disciples really wanted to get in the boat. And Jesus probably said, hey, I'm the boss here in this situation, get in the boat. And it says that Jesus wanted to pray. And so there he is praying, and it's now 3 a.m., and the disciples have been rowing this boat for about 7 hours in a storm, the wind contrary, the waves overwhelming the boat. And in this storm, Jesus is not in the boat with them. Last time, hey, Jesus, wake up, we got a problem. This time, no Jesus. Well, actually, Jesus, he was there. It's kind of interesting. In Mark's account of this, he says, Jesus saw them toiling at the oars. He was on the mountainside. He could see his disciples. And it makes sense because in Hebrews 7:25, Jesus lives to make intercession for us. He prays for us. He watches us. He cares for us. He intercedes for us from heaven. We might not see him, but he sees us. And so Jesus, seeing their problem, goes to them walking on the water. It's interesting. I read a piece this week that there is no other miracle like this particular one. You can categorize the different miracles, but this one stands alone. And so basically, friends, I just want to remind you, in this text, God is striding towards us right in the middle of our most challenging circumstances. I want you to hear that. I want you to absorb that. I want you to walk away from this morning that God will stride towards you in whatever circumstance you're in if you just want to cry out to him. For the disciples, well, people don't walk on water. Just when they think, okay, we're probably going to drown and they can't imagine it getting any worse, they see Jesus. They assume it's a ghost. They probably think, it's the Grim Reaper coming to get them. And you know how our imaginations can run wild with fear? I would imagine this is what's taking place here. The devil will wreak havoc on our emotions if we choose to live in fear, not in faith. When you have an opportunity to be nervous, you can say, if I was just a regular, normal person, I would be nervous. But I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I'm his daughter, his son. I wonder what he's up to in my life right now. That's the way you get to live if you choose to live in faith. And here's a really awkward part of the story. The Bible says Jesus intended to pass them by. Okay, now it's initially said he was going to them, but now when he arrives in their vicinity, he's going to wave, hey guys, good luck with that. No, doesn't make sense. So what does pass them by mean? Well, the Greek word is parakoima, and it appears in the Old Testament in Exodus 33:18 when Moses are having a conversation. Moses says, show me your glory. And God says, I'm going to put you in the rock, and then I will pass by so you can see my glory. He actually says, you will see my goodness. Moses says, I want to see you, and God says, you'll see my goodness. And every time we encounter God, goodness is on the table for us. In 1 Kings 19:11, the Lord said to Elijah, go stand on the mountain. And then a hurricane came by, and then an earthquake shook the rocks of the canyon, and then a fire blew through the canyon. And then there was a gentle blowing. And Elijah went out to have a conversation with God, and he passed by. You see, Jesus isn't passing by, I'll see you on the other side. No, something deeper is going on. Every time we see the word pass by, God is showing his divine nature. And friends, Jesus is doing a divine drive-by with the disciples, revealing his identity as God to them. They cry out and he says, "Do not fear, it is I." And once again, the Greek, ego eimi, it's the same words that God spoke to Moses when he introduced himself. I am. Jesus is saying, I am. It's me, the great I am, God in the flesh. I'm here to protect you. Friends, Christianity is Jesus is God. It's part of the Trinity. That's what we believe about who he is, and this is what Jesus is saying to them, and this is what Jesus is demonstrating for them. Well, Peter does something crazy. Instead of offering Jesus a ride to the shore, "Hey, do you want to get in the boat and, we'll go together?" No. He makes a bold ask. "If it's you, command me to come to you on the water." And I think what Peter's doing is, in the midst of the storm that's going on and a ghostly presence that's frightening, the safest place to be is in the presence of Jesus, so command me to come to you. I want you to be part of the miracle that you're doing. And friends, this is so important for you and me. This is the second storm in a boat that he's been through. And he's now activating faith. Now, the last time I was in a boat with Jesus, things got smooth. I want to learn from that miracle and apply faith to this one. Peter wants to participate in the miracle. Okay? So what does he say? "Call me to come to you," and you can imagine Jesus smiling. "Come." Okay? And there it is. Peter makes a bold step out of the boat and starts walking towards Jesus in the midst of a storm. And his focus is on Jesus, and like master, like disciple. I don't know any other piece of literature where somebody else walked on water, any other human, and Peter gets that unique distinction. Well, here's Peter. He asked for something crazy, and God gave it to him. And I'm always leaning on you to make the bold ask. Last week, 2 weeks ago, make the bold reach to activate Jesus in your life. Peter makes the bold ask. He takes the bold step. And now, something unbelievable is underway. Well, it goes on for a little while, and then suddenly a splash must have hit him. A gust of wind blew his hair back. He takes his eyes off of Jesus. He looks on the storm, immediately begins to sink. Okay? And it's so obvious. Eyes on Jesus, when you have a problem, guess what happens? You see God move through your circumstances. Take your eyes off of Jesus, and suddenly whatever the crisis is becomes this unmanageable situation. And the solution? Eyes back on Jesus. Okay? Well, Peter sinks, and he cries out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus stretched out and grabbed Peter. I want you to notice, first there was the bold ask, then there was the bold step, and now we have the bold reach, and this time it's Jesus making that reach. Wow. I mean, we criticize Peter. I find it so fascinating the way scholars and preachers will jump all over Peter for the failure, and I don't know, he got out of the boat, right? This is, I think, something that is lacking in our world today in Christians. People not making that bold step. You know, the challenge for the American, you know, where the number one selling chair is the Lazy Boy. Okay? Yeah. We like to veg out in front of the TV, and we have a word for that. It's the couch potato. Okay? And I'm going to suggest that the 11 who stayed in the boat, they're boat potatoes. Okay? They didn't take a bold step. They didn't take a risk and trust Jesus. And really, friends, churches are full of people like this. We'll call them pew potatoes. People whose faith is little more than spiritual padding to add comfort to their lives. And for many of us, our life is comfortable. That's a gift from God. But you know what's missing is water walkers. And why don't we walk on water? Because of fear. Fear just cripples us. Fear of the unknown, fear of what people might say, fear of the circumstances, and it holds us back. We live in captivity to safety. You know, Christianity is the adventure of faith with the living God. You know, my devotions just yesterday, Jonathan, in 1 Samuel 14:6, he goes, let's go up to the Philistines. Perhaps the Lord will give us the victory. It's taking a risk, betting on the character of God, stepping out, making a bold step to see how God might show up. And that's called faith, and you'll find that the Lord is pleased with faith. He responds to faith every time. You know, none of the other disciples joined Jesus. They weren't willing to make the bold step. I believe that they could. Can I come too, Lord? Yes. Me? Yes. Me? Yes. And then if everybody they could have all 12 of the disciples stood on the water together, singing a song. Okay? Probably down by the river. This didn't happen. Okay? And I guess I want to say this. You're never going to get what you want from God if you don't make the bold step. A lot of us were asking God, would you do this? Would you do that? But usually there's a step involved that requires faith, that has a risk attached to it. Sometimes to make a change in our unhappiness, we have to quit this job to step into another one. Sometimes, you know, we have to stop a friendship so we can get out from under the wrong direction that we're going. Sometimes we have to start reading the Scriptures so that we can actually get God's Word, ask for more of the Spirit of God so that we can be under His influence. There comes a moment when I got to take the bold step and change my routine so that God can interrupt it, so that God can step in. And I'm just going to ask you, what do you want from Jesus? What is it that you'd like to see your faith accomplish? Are you comfortable just getting blessed? You're going to get blessed in heaven and on earth. But if you want to see the power of God, then you're going to have to make a bold step. And I don't think anything delights Him more than releasing His touch through His children. So many of us were sitting on the sidelines. And God's just waiting for you. He puts a prompting on your heart. This is what I want. This is how I want to move. And He's waiting for you and me. Well, Peter sank. Okay. Yeah, he lost faith, took his eyes off Jesus. And here's the thing. Peter failed, but you know what else? Peter's the only one of the disciples that knows what it's like to be gripped by God in the midst of failure. And friends, you just have to know there's nothing like God's grace. The grace of God. It's His signature move. We all need it at some point in our lives. Some of us need it ongoingly. But here's the deal. That grip, it's the grip that says, another chance to get right with me, another chance to stand up and move in my direction, another opportunity to make the bold step of faith. Well, I don't want you and me to just become a holy huddle, to allow our church just to be a safe place for convinced people. We're convinced that Jesus is God. All around us, people are thrashing in the currents of life. And rather than let them drift out to sea, we ought to offer a lifeline and invite them to experience Jesus and pray about it and set up conversations to see it occur and be inconvenienced and use our finances and our life so that somebody else might meet Jesus. To make that bold step. And it's different for each one of us. I can tell you what my bold step is, but you got a different one. And it's kind of, each one of us, it's scary, but it's exciting because God's involved. When Peter got into the boat, the wind died down, and the disciples worshiped Jesus. Surely you are the Son of God. How can you not see this and come to any other conclusion? I think I told you before about a little girl who met her newborn brother. He's just brought home from the hospital, and she wants to hold her newborn brother, so mom gives it to her and says, listen, you got to support his head. Okay, so she holds him with her hand under the child's head, and, somebody asked the little girl, how did you like meeting your little brother? She said, he's okay, but his head isn't screwed on right. And maybe it's time for you and I to get our heads screwed on right about who Jesus is. In Colossians 1, it says, he is the image of the invisible God, for by him all things were created, and in him all things hold together. God has a claim on your life. He's personally invested in your journey through this life and into eternity. And when things are falling apart, it's him who holds you together. So who's in your boat? Because if you're comfortable, Jesus would love to climb into yours and bring peace to your worries and calm your storms. We've all been in peril of the seas of life, and Jesus, he calms the storms. And you could be in some choppy waters right now, and Jesus is inviting you to step out and trust him, lean on him. Usually what happens is you step out saying, Lord, help me in this situation, and then it gets worse. And if you stay focused on him, that's when you see the hand of God move in the most incredible ways. You experience his supernatural nature. And I know that everybody in this room, no matter where you are in the journey of life, you have a bold step to take. Mark Twain, he said this, the secret to getting ahead is getting started. And so maybe right now, today, in your choppy waters, it's time for you to decide, you know what? I'm going to trust God. I'm going to make a bold step. I'm going to decide to activate this God that I hear about every Sunday and I read about when I open my Bible. And we know about the stories. Theoretically, we understand them. Abraham, he took a bold step and the community of faith was established. Moses took a bold step and the seas parted. 5'7" David fought 9'6" Goliath because he took a bold step. And God's just waiting to do something like that in your life. So maybe it's time to forgive somebody who doesn't deserve it. Time to gently call someone out on their anti-Christian stance and make the case for Jesus. Time to read your Bible and step into the friendship that's awaiting you. Time to give sacrificially to the ministry. Time to become a disciple and live with urgency, passion, and desperation. Maybe it's time to get up in the morning and say, Lord, where do you want me to get my feet wet today? Because that's how the bold steps happen.